De'Aaron Fox.
It was just fancy. It was saucy. That's what they would call it. The move, he didn't shake Steph, but the move was real saucy.
The advanced stats are going to say.
A long, noisy out is what that was.
The advanced stats are going to say, nope, not a good play. But we all know the talent shown there, high ceiling for that young point guard.
Yeah, the ceiling is definitely high for De'Aaron Fox. And it's just because you look at this year, he is shooting the three-point shot a lot better than he did last year. I think last year he was around a 30% three-point shooter. This year he's up to 38, 39%. And what that does is it stretches the defense out. And in pick and roll, you have to guard him so much differently now. You can't go under. You can't confidently switch because he's able to take advantage of those mismatches. He is a next-level athlete when we talk about speed, quickness, and explosion. And if you put the average big on him, he's going to go by them very, very quickly. And if you give him the three-point shot, he's now knocking it down with confidence. Buddy Hield, De'Aaron Fox, watch out. This backcourt in maybe 2 to 3 years might be considered one of the best in the league.
And you sprinkle in Bogdanovic, his ability to make big plays. This is a league pass must-watch every night, this team.
I love watching Sac on League Pass.
So you mentioned those two guys because De'Aaron Fox and Buddy Hield, they're very good, going to be, the ceiling is there, right? But Bogdanovic and Bjelica, those two guys are playing at a level to make them competitive now. How important what do they bring to the table? Is it just the outside shooting? Is it defense? What is it that they're doing that makes this team competitive on a night-in, night-out basis?
Well, Bjelica's playing so well, you almost can't blame him now for walking away from his commitment to Philadelphia. There in the beginning didn't look very good. And he has played at such a high level, and you said this earlier, it's kept Bagley off the floor to a huge degree because he can fill in so many of the gaps for that team. What Bogdan does that I think is really critical is he's just a stone-cold winner. And every team that's going to be good in this league needs to have an elite star-type role player. And Bogdan's a little bit more than a role player, but what he is clutch. And when you need him to make a big play at a big moment, that's what he tends to do. It's what he did at Fenerbahce, and it's what he continues to do at Golden One Center.
Hey, if you don't believe that, hey, ask the Lakers. That shot he hit on Tyson Chandler last week for the buzzer beater in Sacramento was huge.
So when we look at the Golden State Warriors, it's another night, and the box score is Kevin Durant with 13 points, Klay Thompson with 17, Steph Curry with 16, and they're in a dogfight with 70 points at the half, but only up by 1. Defensively, this team needs to find their rhythm to be able to shut teams down, right? That seems to be the problem, the difference past seasons in this year.
Well, I think it's twofold. I think the defense is one, their lack of rim protection. And I also think the fact that Klay Thompson has not been Klay Thompson and what we've come to expect from him, their margin for error is smaller. So they're not out shooting the lack of defense. And I think that team was so good shooting the ball for so long that they really almost shot out your heart a little bit. They took your legs out from under you because they would make big contested three after big contested three, and you would lose a little bit of your momentum and your faith. Now they can't blitzkrieg you in that same way. It's keeping teams in the game longer, and as they attack the rim, they're starting to feel more and more confident against this Warriors team.
When I look at this Golden State team, it just looks like there's a little bit of a chink in the armor just throughout this whole organization. When I'm just talking about, when you talk about up front, of course, they needed more help at the 5. With Jones being hurt, JaVale McGee going to the Lakers, they feel that. They don't have that dynamic roller. Then you look at the fact that guys like Draymond Green isn't playing well offensively. Klay Thompson isn't playing up to the level that he set offensively as a shooter. And then you have some of these little rifts, the rifts between Draymond and KD. I even still think there's maybe not a rift, but just a difference in philosophy between Kevin Durant and Steve Kerr. If you look at some of the comments that they've had in the media since November, I just really think that this team as a whole is just not where it needs to be. I think it's going to get there, and they have the most talent. But Golden State, this is probably the most vulnerable they've been.
Well, if you look at the Chicago juggernaut they had, the 6 championships, and it fell apart from within. Eventually, it just couldn't stay together long enough. And I think this is very much an interesting situation for them because they also have the potential for that. They are so good. The greatest threat to this Warriors team comes from within.
Plus, those Chicago teams, third year of a three-peat is always the hardest year. If you look at their regular seasons, those were the least amount of wins those teams always had.
Great point.
So when you scored 40 points in 5 consecutive games, is scoring 40 in a 6th consecutive game the hardest thing? Because, Griff, stop me if you've heard this before, Jimmy Butler not happy about his situation Why is this different than any other time we've heard this from Jimmy Butler?
Well, if you just suspend the fact that it's Jimmy Butler, you don't think about what's happened to him historically in the past to get to this point. This specific episode is not that unique. This happens often. Players will challenge coaches in meetings during film, etc. It just doesn't get out. To me, what's significant about this issue is not that it's Jimmy saying he's uncomfortable with the offense, because I would bet Jimmy's had conversations with Brett Brown where he's shared these thoughts privately as well. He's probably told Brett when he came over, look, I run hot. This is how I work. I'm really competitive. I'm going to burst out once in a while. Come back at me the same way, because I know he wants you to push back just as hard. What's meaningful to me is it got out. And that, to me, is representative of the fact that there's been some discord there already. They've already had issues with the fit of Joel and Ben Simmons a little bit. They've had issues along the way where people aren't necessarily happy with the fit and role. And when you're 25-14 and you're playing as well as they're playing, it's unusual to have that level of discontent.
I agree with you. I'm a little bit worried that it got out. But we've seen the situation before with Jimmy. Some stuff has got out. My biggest thing that worries me, though, is this is Jimmy's third stop. Normally in baseball, they say 3 strikes and you're out. And he's had problems, whether it be with young players, coaches, other star players, at every single stop. There was rumors that him and Derrick Rose had a little bit of a riff. Same thing with him and Karl Anthony Towns and Wiggins. Now we see this here with the coaching staff. We see the situation with him and Embiid a little bit. It seems like they're going back and forth. I just see a lot of smoke. And for somebody that is going to be up for a maximum extension, you would think that Jimmy Butler would be on his best behavior. If I'm some of the other teams in the league and I'm thinking about throwing max dollars at this guy, that has to be a red flag. I have to start to consider maybe this isn't the guy. Maybe I go after somebody that's less talented but more tolerable in my locker room, because money just makes you more of what you already are. This guy has been here 6 weeks, and he's already cutting up, talking about he needs the ball, challenging the coaching staff. What do you do, and what do you think is going to happen if you give him $200 million? He might cut a slam full.
No, and I think that's true, and certainly because it's Jimmy, you do take into account the history. But I do think it's incredibly common for these conversations to take place and for players to be uncomfortable with their role, particularly when the fit of the pieces is as wonky as it is in Philly. Everybody wants things to be a little different. You remember earlier, Joel was not happy that he was playing so far away from the rim, and the reason they were doing that was a la Brook Lopez, they were trying to open the floor for Ben. So there's already those seeds of discontent. So what Jimmy then ends up doing is he makes the situation seem much worse. But I think there have been several times in the league where you thought it was a brush fire and there wasn't even smoke. And if it wasn't Jimmy Butler, I don't think this is even a story. But because it's Jimmy, that's the story. And to me, the story is it got out and they're unhappy winning this much.
I don't know. It just doesn't sit right with me, because he had the problem with Karl Anthony Towns in Minnesota and who was the guy. And now we see the situation here. I can't be used like, whoa, 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 whoa. When you're not the guy, you have to figure out how to play with the guy. It's the same thing that we experienced in Cleveland. Kevin Love was not happy with his role. He didn't challenge Blatt. He didn't challenge T. Lue. He eventually figured out how to play with LeBron James because he was not the best player on that team. I don't know if Jimmy Butler has gotten that memo that Embiid is the best player on that team. And that worries me, once again, if I'm another team or if I'm a GM thinking about throwing this guy money. Like, if you're the Lakers and you're going after Jimmy Butler, is he going to get in line with LeBron James dominating the ball out here? Like, these are all the questions that you have to ask yourself when you bring Jimmy Butler in here. He is costing himself money by the day.
Yeah, and I don't disagree with the costing himself money thing. If it gets out that Philadelphia does not offer him max, it will be a very bad sign. And other teams around the league will wonder what's wrong. And they will agree, well, this is a problem for Jimmy. But if Philly is going after him full bore and they're offering him max, I think that will be something that teams sort of mitigate. And Kevin Love, you're right. He wasn't initially comfortable with his role, and it took him a long time to find peace with what was being asked of him. He was still voicing it. It's just that he had a different style of doing that. He approached it differently. You have to know that Jimmy's going to be a guy who's going to be all fire and come at you direct all the time. That's who he is. So, again, if he had not had the issues he'd had, I don't even care that he's uncomfortable where he's at right now. It's fine. But to your point, because he's done it so many times, he could potentially cost himself money if he doesn't eventually assimilate and be somebody who helps them win basketball games.
I just think that one of my favorite boxers is Miguel Cotto, and he had a line when he was talking to another fighter. He said, in every fight I was in, I've always known what side I was, whether I was the A side or the B side. I don't think Jimmy Butler realizes sometimes what side he's on. He's the B side. He's acting like he's the A side. You can't come in here talking about, hey, I want to be used this way and I want this, that, and the third. This is Joel Embiid's team. You need to do things in a more diplomatic type of way. You need to talk to Joel. You need to figure out how we're going to play together. But you have to understand, everything runs through the big fella. And I don't think that Jimmy Butler is all the way on board with that.
So, Brendan, we've fully explored Jimmy Butler's side of this, but you see the Brett Brown quote on the screen. I didn't think it went over the line. If it did, I would have addressed it.
He has to say that, though.
So for Brett Brown going forward, the rest of the guys on the team, whether it's Joel Embiid or Ben Simmons, the other people he has to deal with, is this something that may hamper his job going forward if Jimmy Butler is able to speak out in this way and there's not repercussions?
No question. We don't know if it went over the line or if it didn't. But here, let's just say for devil's advocate, it went over the line. He's officially just lost that locker room because now no one respects him. If it went over the line and people think it went over the line and then he comes out and covers and says, oh, no, it didn't go over the line, it's okay, and he doesn't check Jimmy, now people think you're soft. And now what happens, the ripple effect is when Brett Brown wants to yell at Landry Shamet, he's going to be looking up there like, you don't talk to Jimmy like that. Don't come at me all hard. Don't with all that fire. And coaches slowly but surely, the trust erodes away and people just start looking at you like, yeah, whatever. And that's what happens. And that's part of this as well. Jimmy has to understand when he does this, it's not just about Jimmy. That's part of the problem. I think he's living in a Jimmy world and he's only thinking about Jimmy Butler. He's like the NBA's version of Antonio Brown.
We talked about this when they brought him in. They were absolutely increasing both their ability to be really good out of timeout late and design some things that opponents can't deal with. And they were also really increasing their volatility. And Jimmy brings that 100%. There's no question because of how hot he runs. I look at this, though, and I think a team that's this good, they're 25-14 overall. They're playing at a very high level in general terms since Jimmy got there. When you come into the season with the expectations they had, and the only thing that's going to spell success for you is making it to a finals or at least an Eastern Conference Finals, you're either all the way with me or you're all the way against me. So where this becomes interesting is come trade deadline, if they've got people in that room that are against them, they need to act on it because that's the one thing that unequivocally derails a season. This kind of thing is adversity, which is opportunity. You galvanize from this or you get radically worse, but at least it reveals something to you. Where this becomes actually meaningful, and I liked his quote saying what he said, but when this becomes actually meaningful is, A, if you're right about losing the locker room, which certainly I don't think you can say he's done to this point, but if they're not all the way on board with what's being asked of them as a team, then Elton Brand's going to have to start to jettison some of those pieces who aren't. And that's when this becomes intriguing to me.
Well, that's the problem. I think the pieces that you're talking about is Jimmy Butler.
Wow, and they just acquired him, 21 games ago?
It was all good just a week ago.
Mavericks, one of those games, one of 8 games tonight. Also, the Raptors-Bucks, this game we're waiting for, 8:30 right here on NBA TV. That guy, Nikola Jokic, had himself a game. Highlights coming your way.